I'm Lauren Make. Welcome to Battleground Politics. The Pennsylvania Senate race is one of the most closely watched in the country, in a swing state that is already under the microscope because of the presidential race. Senator Bob Casey, a Democrat, is facing Republican challenger Dave McCormick. I sat down with both of them to talk about the race and what they would do if voters picked them. Here's my interview with Dave McCormick. Dave, it's great to see you. Thank you for taking some time. I know you're busy on the campaign trail.
Very busy. I mean, we're going from county to county, and the last 12 days is just a sprint. But I'm excited. I feel great momentum on the ground. I think I'm on a path to victory here because people see a real choice, a real contrast, with me being a political outsider, a West Point graduate, a combat veteran, someone who grew up a seventh-generation Pennsylvanian, born and raised here, against a guy who's been a career politician, 30 years in elected office, 18 years in the Senate, and he's just not been a strong voice for Pennsylvania. And he's voted 98% of the time with Biden and Harris. So that's the choice between change and the status quo, and that's the message that seems to be resonating.
So let's talk about some of the things that are on voters' minds. The economy, inflation, cost, that is something that we hear over and over again. I know that you hear the same. People are looking for somebody who is going to go and make things better for them. People know that you're a former hedge fund CEO. You've done well for yourself. You've loaned millions of dollars to your campaign. So tell me, why should the average voter believe you're going to go to Washington and fight for them instead of other wealthy business people?
Yeah. Well, the key is, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I grew up in Bloomsburg. My dad was the president of Bloomsburg State College, but I worked on the family farm. I was a busboy at the McGee Hotel. I've lived the American dream. I went to West Point. I came back to Pittsburgh. I helped run a company and helped initially build and then eventually became the CEO of the company. So I'm what we want to have happen for our kids. We want every kid to have the opportunity to be successful, and that's not happening right now in Pennsylvania. That challenge is our young people are leaving. So we need to create economic opportunity. Despite having success in the career I've had, I've stayed very connected to my close friends in Pennsylvania. I have my family farm where I grew up in Bloomsburg. So I'm very much in touch with the challenges that face Pennsylvania. And in the last 12 months, I've done about 450 visits this calendar year, 450 visits across Pennsylvania. So whether it's dairy farms or manufacturers or cosmetology schools, whatever it is, I have spent time understanding very specifically the problems.
You mentioned your opponent, Bob Casey. You said he voted with President Biden about 98% of the time. According to the folks who track those things, that is about correct. When you look at what former President Trump is proposing to do in his second term, is there anything that he is proposing to do that you would be a no on, that you would be a no vote on?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think generally his policy of bringing inflation back in check, energy dominance, securing the borders, which have become a national crisis, law and order. So I'm very much in line with the direction of his common sense policies. But just the other day, he said that he wanted to lift the cap, the SALT cap, which is essentially a tax break for wealthy families, particularly in California.
The state and local tax deduction.
Yeah, state and local tax deduction. And I wouldn't support that. And
would that be enough for you to vote against renewing the tax bill?
No, it wouldn't be enough to vote against renewing the tax bill. I think the tax bill was generally great, but I would fight to not have that. I would be very public about not having that be part of the tax bill. There's a lot of things I would add to it, like fertility treatment tax exemption, and I double or triple the child tax credit. But as a specific thing, he's one of the things he said he'd do. I'm not in favor of that because I think it's not helping Pennsylvanians. So the thing that your viewers can count on, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected to the Senate, I'm going to fight for the interest of Pennsylvania. That's my only job, and my allegiance is to the people of Pennsylvania.
You have talked about reining in spending, and the former president has made a bunch of proposals: no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, being able to deduct interest from auto loans, plus that tax bill. That those things are estimated to cost trillions of dollars. Are you okay with that spending?
Well, let me make it. There's two different things going on at the same time. So, what's happening with Biden and Harris, and Bob Casey voted for this, was $5 trillion of new spending. And so if you see a hockey stick, like Republicans and Democrats alike have spent too much money for 20 years, but it went like this. under Biden-Harris. And I'm very opposed to much of that spending because it went into huge subsidies for windmills and solar panels and electric vehicles, which I think have been the key drivers of inflation. The difference between what President Trump's proposing and what Biden and Harris, and even Harris is proposing in her next term if she were to be president, is the government spending your money versus tax breaks where you spend your money. So that's very different. So when you say increasing spending by giving the money back to the people for them to spend it well. So we've got to have fiscal constraint, and obviously,
although there were those subsidy checks that went out. Stimulus checks that went out. There were the.
You mean during COVID?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, certainly. What first happened under President Trump during COVID is the COVID stimulus checks, which I would have supported at the time. But what's happened since then under President Biden-Harris, and again, 98%, Bob Casey, is spending that's really hurt working families. And I just like to make a little quick point here: is the worst tax in the world is inflation, because the 20% rise in prices hurts working families. It hurts elders on fixed income. 60% of Pennsylvanians live paycheck to paycheck. So they've gotten a lot worse under the reckless spending of Biden-Harris. And again, Senator Casey's been there every step of the way.
I'm going to switch topics. You have said that you would not support a national abortion ban. As a U.S. Senator, would you do anything to prevent states from banning abortion?
Listen, when you say it's states' rights, it's a states' rights. I think we need to take the power out of the hands of judges, which is why I supported overturning Roe v. Wade. Give it to the people to decide and pick, vote for people who are going to put in place. It's a very polarizing issue, and one that's very divisive in different places. And the people of Pennsylvania have decided. And as you know, Republicans and Democrats alike supported the legislation we have. A governor named Casey, Senator Casey's father, signed it into law, and I support that. Pennsylvanians have made that decision, and I also support the 3 exceptions, and I would not support national legislation or a ban of any kind.
When you say the three exceptions, I want to make sure that I do understand what that means to you. The rape, incest, life of the mother; those are talked about a lot as the 3 exceptions to any to an abortion law. What does that mean to you? Does that mean that those are the only times that you think someone should be able to get an abortion?
Well, what I'm saying is states should decide at what point women have choice up until the point where they're restricted from having choice. Pennsylvanians have made that decision. And then the 3 exceptions, those exceptions women should have the choice of how to deal with a pregnancy throughout the pregnancy with those 3 exceptions. And of course, life of the mother is something that may develop over the course of the pregnancy.
Are you concerned at all, because you had said it should be up to the states, then you would not, as senator, take any steps to prevent a state from putting in restrictions or a ban? Are you concerned about women's health in those states if there were to be bans in states? Are you concerned about women's health in those states, and do you think that as a senator you should step in?
Well, I think it's, as I said, I think this is an issue where people are going to have to balance and vote for people in their various states that manage all these things. I think we should expand the conversation around reproductive rights. I think we should talk about contraception. I think we should talk about support for adoption and make that a much more meaningful option, as we just talked about. I think we should support fertility treatments to expand what we mean by reproductive rights, so all parents, regardless of their income level, have the option to have children. But I also think that because this is so personal and polarizing and difficult, that it's very important that we put the power to decide in the hands of the people who are going to vote for legislators that support their views on this. And it's going to be different by states.
Let me stay on the issue of families. You have proposed banning kids under the age of 16 from social media. Why should parents not make that decision? Well,
I think parents should make that decision. So the social media companies now are working to give parents much more control. But listen, this is an issue which we're now seeing all sorts of potential assaults on children through social media. Predators can get access to them. We're seeing that there may be a connection between the mental health crisis we see in our country and the excessive time kids spend on social media, something like 3.5 hours a day. And so this is becoming an issue of real national significance, and I think we need to deal with it. Some combination of parental controls orchestrated by the social media companies giving the parents much more oversight, but also in some cases recognizing that a kid needs to have an ID or even is forbidden from buying cigarettes or something like that until the age of 18 or the age of 16. So I think we need to be careful to understand. I'm one who's typically very much leaning on individual freedom, but when it comes to our children, I think that there's some potentially pretty damaging effects of social media that we need to take steps to minimize. And I'm particularly worried about access to predators who potentially access children through social media.
I know that we're going to run out of time. I do want to ask you also about the issue of immigration, which has been a big one. And Senator J.D. Vance just recently talked about temporary protected status migrants who are in this country legally because they have TPS, temporary protective status. And he said that in the Trump-Vance administration, they want to end what he called mass grants of temporary protective status. Do you think that program should continue?
I'm not sure about that program. I mean, I know it's created some very big issues because you have communities like Springfield that are overwhelmed. But I think that's sort of the small thing. The big thing is that we have 10 million illegal immigrants that have entered our country under the Biden-Harris-Casey regime. Senator Casey's voted against the border wall. He's voted against funding for the Border Patrol. He's voted for sanctuary cities. And we have this enormous fentanyl crisis here in Pennsylvania. 4,000 people died last year. In the last couple months, I've sat down on 2 occasions with fentanyl families. Yesterday, I was at a fentanyl testing facility, spent a lot of time with law enforcement. I don't think the crisis of fentanyl could be overstated. We lost 116,000 Americans last year. And it requires real leadership on this, which I think Senator Casey has failed on. Not just to secure the border, although that, potentially use the military to go after the cartels, which I've talked about, but also huge efforts on the demand side to reduce the demand and addiction, and also harm reduction by having the right Narcan and things like that to help mitigate and minimize the risk of all our young people being affected by it. So this is a huge, huge thing. And I think when you talk about immigration and the border, this is the central issue, in my opinion.
And I know we're just about out of time. I just want to ask you just one more thing, because I asked your opponent about an ad that he has out attacking you regarding Social Security and Medicare, claiming that you had made it clear that you would slash them. So, and that got 4 Pinocchios from the Washington Post. So I do want to ask you, what is your plan for Social Security and Medicare to make sure that they remain solvent, because time is ticking on that?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm glad you brought that up, because I mean, this is the campaign Senator Casey's run. He has run a campaign that's been 90% focused on attack ads on me, most of which have been proven.
And I brought that ad up again, but I want to know, what is your plan?
I'll talk about it in a minute, but most of which have been proven to be complete false. So the Washington Post, which is not necessarily known as a conservative newspaper, showed that was a complete lie, that I've never said I would cut Social Security or Medicare. So
what would
the
you
reason, first of all, we have to live up to our commitments. So I wouldn't touch them in terms of our responsibility.
But you have to do something, or they'll become insolvent.
Well, no, the Social Security and Medicare, the reason Medicare is insolvent is because $780 billion was robbed by the Obama administration to underwrite Obamacare. So we have to get our fiscal house in order. But the way to get our fiscal house in order is not to take away from the commitments we've made to our elders or from Medicare. So again, an example of Senator Casey, we certainly need to get our fiscal house in order. The place I would start was with the trillions of dollars of subsidies, the EPA mandates of 70% of new light vehicles from sold by 2032 have to be electric vehicles. All of these hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies, when you want to talk about what's putting Social Security and Medicare at risk, it's that reckless spending that Senator Casey supported every step of the way.
I know we're out of time. Just before we go, do you have an age in mind where things would change?
No.
Okay. All right. I hope we get to talk about it some more. Dave, thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
You can find my interview with Senator Bob Casey in another episode of Battleground Politics, available right now. You can find Battleground Politics on NBC10.com, on our NBC Philadelphia YouTube page, or wherever you get your podcasts.